These were unbelievably savage crimes. They were the violence in some of them is unlike anything I've ever seen. Mary Kelly was flayed to the bone. I mean, this is not some cute little Ripper walk. This was a terrible serial killer.
September 1888. London's deadliest serial killer vanished into the night. Over a century later, headlines declared DNA finally exposed Jack the Ripper, naming a Polish barber, Adrian Kosminski, with claims of 100% certainty. But within 5 years, the critical evidence was lost, and the findings collapsed. And the question that haunted police in 1888 remains: was Jack the Ripper truly unmasked, or did the science itself become part of history's deadliest whodunit? What really happened in those 10 minutes that changed crime forever? London, autumn, 1888. The city's poorest neighborhoods were gripped by fear as a string of murders unfolded with a speed and brutality that left even seasoned police stunned. 5 women were killed between August and November, each attack more savage than the last. On the night of September 30th, a pattern of horror reached its breaking point. Just after midnight, Elizabeth Stride was found dead in Dutefield's yard, her throat slashed. Less than an hour later, another woman, Catherine Eddowes, stepped into the darkness of Mitre Square. She had been released from the local police station at 1 a.m. after sobering up in a cell. By 1:45 a.m., she was dead. Her body was discovered by Constable Edward Watkins, who had passed through the square only 15 minutes earlier and found nothing amiss. The 10 minutes gap between Watkins' patrols defined the killer's method: strike fast, vanish faster. Eddowes' throat was cut to the spine, her face mutilated, her left kidney removed with surgical precision. The killer worked in near total darkness, surrounded by city life, and left no witnesses behind. In the span of less than an hour, 2 women were murdered within walking distance of each other, and the murderer disappeared into the maze of alleys and gas-lit streets before police could react. Mitre Square was no hidden corner. Constables patrolled regularly, market porters passed through at all hours, and yet no one saw or heard the killer at work. The only clue to the timeline was the rigid discipline of Constable Watkins' patrol. 1:30 a.m., the square empty. 1:45 a.m. Eddowes' body. The killer operated with a confidence that suggested either luck or careful planning, exploiting every blind spot and every moment the city looked away. The Whitechapel murders were not just acts of violence, they were a challenge to the very idea of public safety. Each victim's name, Mary Ann Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, Mary Jane Kelly, became a grim tally of failure for the police. The murderer's ability to kill and escape undetected, even as patrols tightened and panic spread, forced investigators to rethink every assumption about evidence and detection. Every artifact from these scenes, every scrap of fabric or trace of blood, became precious. In a world before fingerprints and forensic science, the hope of catching the killer rested on finding something, anything, that could link a suspect to the crime. That brief interval in Mitre Square would haunt detectives for generations, fueling the desperate search for a clue that could finally name the man who called himself Jack the Ripper. Aaron Kosminski's name first appeared in police files years after the Whitechapel murders ended, but his presence in the heart of the killing grounds never faded from official suspicion. Born in Poland in 1865, Kosminski arrived in London as a teenager, settling with his family in Sion Square, a maze of alleys just minutes from the murder scenes. By 1888, he was 23 years old, working as a barber, living within walking distance of every Ripper killing. The case against Kosminski wasn't built on physical evidence, but on the observations and instincts of senior detectives who spent years haunted by what they couldn't prove. In 1894, Assistant Chief Constable Melville McNaughton wrote, "Kosminski, a Polish Jew with a great hatred of women and strong homicidal tendencies." This was not idle speculation. Kosminski's mental health had collapsed in the years after the murders. He was plagued by voices, refused to bathe, and scavenged food from gutters. In February 1891, he threatened his sister with a knife and was committed to an asylum, where he remained for the next 29 years. When he died in 1919, he weighed just 97 pounds. The most direct link came from the night Catherine Eddowes was killed. At 1:35 a.m., Joseph Lawenda, a cigarette salesman, passed through Mitre Square and saw a man talking with a woman who matched Eddowes' description. Lawenda later described the man as about 30, with a fair complexion, a small mustache, and a medium build, details that fit Kosminski's appearance. Years later, police brought Lawenda to identify a suspect. According to Sir Robert Anderson, the witness recognized Kosminski instantly, but refused to testify. Chief Inspector Swanson noted the reason: both men were Jewish, and Lawenda would not condemn another Jew to the gallows. Without a statement, the identification was useless in court. Three of the top investigators, McNaughton, Anderson, and Swanson, all named Aaron Kosminski as their prime suspect in private memoranda. Each cited his proximity to the crimes, his documented mental instability, and the eyewitness identification that came so close to closing the case. But the evidence was always just out of reach. With no confession, no forensic proof, and no willing witness, Kosminski was never charged. The official files, so careful in their details, left a vacuum that later generations would try to fill with new science. Kosminski's name, preserved in police records and whispered in detective memoirs, became the starting point for every search for physical evidence. When DNA technology finally arrived, it was his shadow that loomed over every new test, every claim of a breakthrough, and every attempt to finally put a name to the face that vanished down the alleys of Whitechapel. Aaron Kosminski remained, and remains, a compelling figure at the center of a mystery that has outlasted witnesses, records, and the certainty of science. Russell Edwards held up the silk shawl as the centerpiece of his investigation, a relic he claimed had soaked up the blood of Catherine Eddowes and the DNA of her killer. But the story of this artifact is tangled in gaps and contradictions that stretch back more than a century. The first problem is the official record. On September 30th, 1888, police cataloged every item found on or near Eddowes' body. The list included a bonnet, a jacket, a red gauze scarf, and a white handkerchief, but no shawl. Victorian detectives, known for their meticulous inventories, made no mention of any large silk wrap or scarf. If such an item had been present, it would have been logged, examined, and likely presented at the inquest. Yet the shawl's name appears nowhere in the surviving police files or coroner's transcripts. The legend of the shawl's survival begins with Sergeant Amos Simpson, a Metropolitan Police officer whose family later claimed he took the item from the scene as a favor for his wife. That story rests entirely on family lore. Simpson was stationed outside London and had no documented reason to be at Mitre Square that night. No duty roster, station log, or eyewitness account places him at the scene. The account survives only in family testimony, passed down through generations, never supported by a single official document. For the next 126 years, the Shaw's path is a patchwork of anecdotes and undocumented transfers. Simpson's descendants reportedly kept it as a family keepsake, but there are no wills, letters, or inventories to confirm this. By the 1990s, fragments of the textile surfaced in the hands of collectors and Ripper enthusiasts, and parts were loaned to Scotland Yard's Black Museum. Auction houses and private owners traded the cloth, but none could provide a continuous, verified chain of custody until 1888. At public exhibitions and conventions, the shawl was handled without gloves, and even descendants of Edos were invited to view it up close. Scientific analysis added new doubt. When Sotheby's examined the textile in the 1990s, their experts dated the weave and dyes to the Edwardian era, manufactured between 1900 and 1910, at least a dozen years after the Whitechapel murders. That single fact undermines any claim that the shawl could have absorbed evidence from the crime scene. Later dye analysis suggested a possible Russian manufacture date before 1888, but that report was never independently confirmed. With no documentation from the night of the murder, no reliable ownership trail, and a fabric date that post-dates the crime, the shawl's status as a crime scene artifact collapses under scrutiny. The object at the heart of the DNA claim is at best, an Edwardian curiosity with a story built on gaps and wishful thinking. Without provenance, no amount of laboratory testing can turn it into admissible evidence. In 2014, a silk shawl that had spent more than a century in private hands became the center of a scientific investigation that promised to end one of history's longest-running mysteries. Russell Edwards, the owner of the shawl, partnered with Dr. Jari Louhelainen at Liverpool John Moores University to put modern DNA technology to the test. The process began with a careful search for biological traces, blood, semen, and any remaining cells that might hold genetic secrets from 1888. Using infrared and ultraviolet light, the team mapped stains invisible to the naked eye. Microscopes revealed clusters of dried blood and other biological material embedded deep in the fibers. To make a comparison, Karen Miller, the 3 times great-granddaughter of Catherine Eddowes, provided a DNA sample. 7 segments of mitochondrial DNA were extracted from the bloodstains on the shawl and compared to Miller's maternal line. The results came back with 99.2% match on the first strand and a full 100% match on the second. For the semen stains, the team contacted living descendants of Aaron Kosminski. The mitochondrial DNA from these samples matched a particular genetic signature, haplogroup T1A1, common among Russian and Polish Jewish populations. The same haplogroup was found in the material lifted from the shawl. The lab reported a clear match between those profiles. Edwards wasted no time making his case to the public. He called the match 100% certainty and declared that the science had finally named Jack the Ripper. In 2019, the findings were published in the Journal of Forensic Sciences. The paper, co-authored by Dr. Louhelainen and Dr. David Miller, laid out the steps: DNA extraction, amplification of 7 mitochondrial segments, and comparison to living relatives. But the details that mattered most to other scientists were missing: the raw DNA sequences, the statistical probabilities, and the controls against contamination. Instead, the publication included colored boxes to indicate matches, with no underlying data available for independent review. The public claim outpaced what the paper actually provided. The media seized on the headline, "DNA had solved the Ripper case." Newspapers and television repeated the claim that the blood matched a descendant of Catherine Eddowes and that the semen matched the family line of Aaron Kosminski. The story of a 126-year-old piece of silk, a modern laboratory, and a long-dead suspect was irresistible. And for a moment, it looked as if the riddle of Whitechapel had finally been answered with science. The headline traveled fast. But beneath the excitement, the foundation of the claim rested on results that could not be checked or reproduced by anyone outside the original team. The bold announcement set the stage for a new round of scrutiny and a battle over what DNA evidence can truly prove. The absence of raw data and independent verification left serious questions about contamination, provenance, and the limits of mitochondrial DNA. The science had been applied, and the controversy had only just begun. Dr. Hansi Weissensteiner, a leading mitochondrial DNA expert, put it plainly. Based on mitochondrial DNA, one can only exclude a suspect. The mitochondrial DNA on the shawl could be from Kosminski, but also from thousands in London. The numbers back her up. Haplogroup T1A1, the genetic signature found on the shawl, appears in about 3.5% of Europeans. In 1888, London's population stood at 5 million. That means as many as 175,000 to 400,000 people in the city could have shared the same maternal lineage as Aaron Kosminski. A match to this DNA profile is not a unique fingerprint. It is a broad family resemblance scattered across entire communities. The science of exclusion is not the science of identification. Mitochondrial DNA passes largely unchanged from mother to child, so it can rule someone out, but it cannot single someone in. Even a perfect match to Kosminski's living relatives only proves the DNA could have come from him, or from any of the hundreds of thousands who share his maternal line. This is the hard limit of what mitochondrial DNA can offer in a case like this. Contamination adds another layer of uncertainty. Dr. Peter Gill, a pioneer in forensic genetics, warned that after 126 years of uncontrolled handling, the number of handlers makes contamination likely. The shawl passed through multiple families, museums, collectors, and public displays with no reliable record of who touched it or when. Each person left traces of their own DNA, mixing modern profiles with any original material. Without strict documentation and negative controls, there is no way to know whether the DNA came from Eddowes, Kosminski, or someone else entirely. 6 fundamental standards for forensic DNA evidence were not met in this case. Provenance verification was not established. Contamination controls were not published. Independent replication of the analysis did not occur. Statistical probability calculations were not provided. Raw sequence data was never released. Peer verification was incomplete. By any modern forensic checklist, the foundation for claiming a solved case simply does not exist. The limitations of the science, the high likelihood of contamination, and the absence of key data all combine to leave the Ripper's identity as uncertain as ever. August 2024 brought a decisive blow to the case. The Journal of Forensic Sciences issued a formal notice stating that the authors said the data were no longer available due to instrument data failure. Because it was not possible to examine the original data, no determination could be made. Concerns regarding data and results cannot be resolved. The DNA sequences that once promised answers had vanished, lost to a technical failure, leaving no files for review, no backups, and no way to check the work. The 2019 claim, which had electrified the Ripper community, unraveled in a single statement. Russell Edwards refused to let go. By January 2025, he had hired Tim Sampson to lead a legal push, demanding that the Attorney General authorize an inquest to officially name Aaron Kosminski as Jack the Ripper. Edwards insisted, 100% certainty. This is the final word. Karen Miller, Catherine Eddowes' descendant, joined the call for justice. She said, "What about the real name? Having the person legally named would be justice. We have the proof. Now we need this inquest." But the legal system stalled. The Attorney General's office, led by Michael Ellis, had already rejected a previous petition as not sufficient new evidence. Coroner Nadia Persaud saw no reason to object to a new hearing, but doubted it would change the outcome. As of November 2025, the petition lingered unresolved, with no court date and no official recognition of Kosminski. Forensic DNA expert Jarrett Ambeau challenged Edwards' certainty. He said there was not enough information to identify Jack the Ripper. Mitochondrial DNA does not have the power to identify individuals like nuclear DNA. This DNA is degraded. What about all the people that touched this item in 137 years? The evidence could fit the families of Eddowes and Kosminski or countless others. The shawl's origins, its presence at the crime scene, and the age of the material remained unprovable. With the data gone, the case slipped back into limbo. Since 1888, no one has been convicted for the Whitechapel murders. The promise of science faded, and the central question endured. Mitre Square remains a shorthand for a 10-minute window in 1888 that created a mystery lasting 137 years. Jack the Ripper is not famous for who he was. He is famous for who we will never know him to be. The evidence is insufficient. The case remains unsolved. Aaron Kosminski remains a compelling suspect in history's murder mystery. Today, forensic science faces a hard truth. Claims without verifiable evidence fuel more myth than fact. As technology advances, the demand for transparency grows. The real danger isn't uncertainty, but certainty built on missing data. The world's most infamous killer remains unnamed, not because we lack suspects, but because we keep mistaking possibility for proof. What do you believe? Let's talk in the comments.